Hello.
Hi, Jane. It's good to see you.
You too.
Thank you so much for taking time to come on, and hope
No,
all's
it's
well on
good.
your side of the world.
It's always good to chat with you, my friend.
Yeah, yeah. And did you have a nice row this morning?
Gorgeous. Yeah,
Hmm.
gorgeous. We went out in a quad and it's just a beautiful day. It's a beginning of spring, or it feels like beginning of spring, so lovely.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I was just in the water. I've been doing my open water swimming and hopping in every chance I can get before it.
Don't want to go swimming at this stage of the year. We do our best not to end up in the water, but no, it's good fun.
I wear a decent amount of neoprene, Jane. Yeah. Well, Jane, I was so excited to share with our newsletter and online this really beautiful palette you designed. Oh, it's just so cute.
Well, you designed the palette. I just put the colours in it.
That's true. That's true. But you really inspired this color set. And last time we talked about triads, you posted this picture, and we were also curious about what is that cute demi palette, Jane. And I thought
Yes.
we should just put it together and share it with everyone. Which months later, here it is.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought it would be fun to just kind of walk people through the palette a little bit. We could share the colors, and I can demonstrate them on my desk. And I know that this palette has these really fun triads, which is kind of a theme. And then one thing I really love about this palette, especially since it's in a really small package, is it has like really great convenience colors too. So I feel like it's good both for like exploring a range of possibilities of mixing and like experimenting with that realm. And then having taken it for a little test run in the woods, it's also really useful just for like getting paint on paper fast.
Yes, which is what you need. So I feel that the smaller the mixing space, the more you've got to think about some convenience colours. So
Yeah.
it's always a juggling act. And so in this case, I've actually got the convenient sap green, which is a really lovely mixture. But no, not often. Usually in my palettes I have phthalo green. There isn't that in here, so it's
Yeah.
not a scary palette. It doesn't have the phthalo colours that scare a lot of people. So
A
it's a
little
very
bit of
friendly.
phthalo goes a long way.
It does. It certainly does.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
without having the phthalo colours,
Oh, that's all right.
it's actually really helpful to have some mixes that use them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let
Okay.
me go ahead and switch my camera, and then I can swatch and demonstrate maybe as we can talk through them together.
All right. All right. We'll do.
All right. So, triads. Gosh, Jane, it's just always a treat to talk color with you because, my family sometimes gets tired of listening to me geek out over colors, and and there's just so many wonderful possibilities. And I confess, I get a lot of joy out of experimenting and mixing as well. For me, there's the joy of going out and sketching. I'll just give you a peek. These were really
Lovely.
quick. I was out with my family, so some little river studies. And speaking of greens,
Yeah.
it's just so dense in the forest, kind of beyond my normal comfort zone of like vast landscapes, but a lot of fun. And was doing these with this new little palette and really exploring, like I said,
See
kind of
what it
that
can
range
do.
of mixes. And yeah, so anyhow, it's just so fun to have something to play with.
All right. Well, let's start with the basic triad. So that's the one that does all this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the top line is those three. So that's the Hansa Yellow Medium and the Quinacridone Rose and Ultramarine. So those first three will give you an extraordinary range of colours. So you can try and make an orange with that, and also a red by increasing the amount of rose in the mix. You'll get a beautiful red as well as all the oranges.
Yeah.
And so that reduces the need to have a warm red if you're able to do that. The limit is a crimson. You can't quite do a really strong crimson. But I figure with a lot of natural sketching and urban sketching and so on, where you might use this sort of palette, that's a limitation that's okay. And then when you mix the rose with the blue, you make a beautiful range of purples. And so that gives you all those purple ranges, and obviously the slightly magenta colours and the deep bluey purples and so on. So that basic triad, when you just mix two of them, gives you those lovely secondaries. And the greens you make are quite usable. So when you mix the yellow with the ultramarine, it isn't too garish. So it's bright enough to be that lovely spring green, but it isn't so bright that it's a bit harder to use. So that gives a realistic, workable, basic green.
Yeah, and you can
verge
it more yellow.
And then if you mix all three together, you can create an extraordinary range of browns. So if you add a touch of ultramarine into your mixed orange, you'll get lovely browny colours and burnt sienna colours and eventually greys, depending on how you mix them. There is a convenience grey as well, but you know, these colours will do all sorts of things. So I will put that up again and just sort of see that's the kind of range you can get.
Jane, I could just look at your color charts all day, just the beauty of all the colors kind of sparkling next to each other and all those little variations. Oh, there's that brown really coming out, that nice sienna.
Yes, and so obviously you add a little bit more red and you make that a bit more of a warmer color, a bit more yellow, and you move it towards the raw sienna sorts of colors. So you can adjust that quite a lot to create all those. So that's the one triad, and that's a really basic sketching triad. The other one that I've put in there is the Goaphate. So that's the bottom one on the left.
Okay, here I go.
Yep.
Yep, Goaphate.
So Goaphate, which is a pigment yellow, PY43, but it's like a yellow ochre pigment, but with incredible granulation. So this is beautiful in landscapes and beaches and all those sorts of things. So I choose it for its granulation. If you need it to be just a little bit more yellow, then obviously you can add a bit of Quinacridone Gold to it. But this one mixed with the one in the middle, the Indian red, and then gives you those lovely earthy oranges. So it'll make burnt sienna hues.
Yeah,
but it's got that lovely granulation. And then the cerulean is what I'm considering an earthy blue. So when you add that in, you create these gorgeous earthy purpley colours, very neutralised purples, but really quite lovely.
Those are some of my favorites, that cerulean earthy mix with the granulation. Yes. And then in the paper, especially I paint a lot on Arches cold press, like it feels like some of the granules sink in and some stay on top. So you get up close to a painting and it's got this just interplay of pigments that just sparkles to me. I love that.
Oh, it's lovely. And if you want more of that, you do it on damp the paper first and you'll get even more granulation. And then the greens you can mix with this are beautiful as well. So you mix the Goaphate with the Cerulean Chromium and you get really lovely greens. And it's a really nice one for urban sketching. So this is done with just that triad. And even the greens that you make, they're slightly unusual, but they work. So that's that.
Yeah. And we've talked about this before, but that limited palette, like in that painting you just showed, everything holds hands when the blue in the sky is the blue and the greens and mixed into the shadows. And there's that lovely sense of unity throughout an entire piece.
Yes, and it also really simplifies the process, because if you've only got one yellow you're working with and you need it to be a bit more yellow, you don't have to think, oh, which one will I use? You just go for the one yellow. So that triad is the Goaphate, the Indian red, and the Cerulean Chromium. So,
I'm just going to hold up here. I'm seeing some of this granulation from that Goaphate coming in.
Isn't it gorgeous?
I love that. Oh, I love granulation so much. It's like, especially with you know, this earth triad with rocks and kind of when you're painting something textured, seeing that come out. Oh, just beautiful.
Yes. So it has those two triads, and then of course you can vary it. So instead of using the Hansa Yellow Medium, you can switch over to Quinacridone Gold. Quinacridone Gold mixed with ultramarine makes the most extraordinary range of beautiful, slightly dulled down greens. Now it's really, I think of these as very Australian, but you see a lot of these colours in your state as well. These really rich, slightly more neutral ones. So the Quinacridone Gold and the ultramarine will give you more neutralised, slightly more olivey greens.
And Quinacridone Gold is also, well, I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but that's one of my favorite colors for sort of glazing and making things feel a little more light-filled. If I end up with something that looks a bit dull, I might just put a light, thin wash. Oh, that's a beautiful green. And I love with Quin Gold how varying the wash, having some of the darker and the lighter within one area, it creates a little depth and variation.
Yes, well, it makes an incredible range. Just that combination makes an amazing range. So it's a beautiful one to work with. And then, of course, you can vary it again. You can switch over and use cerulean instead of ultramarine. So I've worked it out with 3 basic triads, but there are many others that you can explore using this palette. So the cerulean becomes your cool blue. And if you do that with the Hansa Yellow Medium, you'll make brighter greens with granulation. So these will be, a bit more spring-like. And then, of course, you can still add the Quinacridone Rose.
Kind of dull it down with that complement.
Yeah, and make it more olive if you need to.
Yeah.
So mixing opposites always creates these lovely neutral colours. So there's the main 3 triads, then there's within that a few other triads that you can play around with. And then there's also burnt sienna, because that's just such an important mixing colour. Burnt sienna and ultramarine give you an extraordinary range of, you've obviously got the burnt sienna colour, and if you warm it up with a tiny bit of ultramarine, it'll go into a burnt umber colour. If you add a little bit more, it'll start to go towards a grey. And so that range of colours is really handy. So you don't need to have burnt sienna because you can create it. But then there's also, because it takes a bit of time and lots of mixing and water to get to it, there's also Jane's Grey, which is the one down below the cerulean. So that is the ready-made mixture of these 2 to create quick shadows and quick dark.
And the fun thing is, oh, sorry.
It also acts as a neutral tint. So if you want to darken any of the other colours, you add a tiny bit of Jane's Grey into that other colour and it will deepen it without changing it. So if you just put a little tiny bit of quinacridone, well, try it with cerulean, for example.
Yeah.
You put a bit of cerulean in and just a touch of Jane's Grey, and it will just deepen the colour.
Oh,
so you don't
nice
always
moody
have to
sky.
mix the opposite. Yeah, that's right. Stormy skies, all those cerulean and Jane's Grey works very, very well.
I was going to say with Jane's Grey too, as a shortcut in this palette, if you want to use it as that sort of preliminary point too, you can go in and add in a little sienna if you wanted to verge it towards the sienna, or come in and add a little bit of that blue too. So it's that real convenience mix for.
Yes. So while we know we can make it, it's there already, which just helps. Yeah. And then the sap green is really useful just because it's a very natural mix. So it's a mixture of phthalo green and quinacridone gold. Now we don't have phthalo green in the palette, so it gives you a very quick go-to green for botanicals, for quick foliage, the sunlight on them and so on. And so it's a very helpful starting green. And then the phthalo green, which is one at the very top right.
Oh, Perylene.
Perylene green is going to really give that depth. So at the bottom of a shadow, if you're doing foliage, you add a little bit of Perylene green into it, and it gives you that wonderful rich depth and the shadows in foliage and landscape.
And Perylene will mix to
at the top.
Yeah. I was just going to say Perylene at its strongest too is like a near black. It's such a nice dart for strong values.
Well, it is actually a black pigment. I mean, it looks green, but it is actually, it's a black pigment that it's created from. But it's a lovely green that you would, to mix it from other colours, you'd mix phthalo green and crimson, which aren't in this palette. And so once again, it's a way of having this beautiful dark green without having to mix it. It's one of the colours that I often do use in a limited palette is raw umber, and it was a bit of a toss-up whether I put in sap green or raw umber. But I decided on this one that there's so often foliage that you've got to paint, that having these 2 greens, so you've got your main 2 yellows, 2 reds, 2 blues, 2 greens, and so on. It just sort of makes it a bit easier to work with. And then, of course, there's buff titanium, which is one of those just amazing colours, because some people look at it and just say, what do you do with that? But in urban sketching, I use it so much for marble effects and for beaches and for sandstone. That with a little touch of goethite and a little touch of burnt sienna gives the most amazing colours for sandstone. And I live in Sydney, we have a lot of gorgeous sandstone. But for beaches, goethite and buff titanium mixed up together on a wash of water gives you a beautiful sandy beach, and the granulation creates the granules. And so it's a really lovely one to add as well. And then if you're doing marble, or if you're doing, some florals have that slightly pastel kind of look to them. And buff titanium and Perylene green makes a really lovely colour for some of the Australian ladies in particular. So really mixes there.
Oh,
So
there it is. Yeah.
if you want to make pastel pinks or pastel yellows or anything else, you just add the buff titanium.
It reminds me too of like a copper roof. If you know, maybe a touch more of the
add a touch
cerulean
of
blue
gold into it to get that copper oxidization.
Mm-hmm.
I would tend to use cerulean and a bit of green gold to make that oxidation too. So that will give you that lovely, slightly turquoisey look. So the cerulean and a touch of quin gold, and it gives you the oxidation look. Then you make potters pink. If you want to make a potters pink hue, if you just take a tiny bit of Indian red and a tiny bit of buff titanium, you'll come very, very close.
Indian red and a little buff titanium. Trying to paint as fast as and
then a fair bit of water. So mix those together and water it down, and you get a potters pink hue. So it's only a comment I've noticed, so I haven't seen which of the others. Which colours make up sap green? It's phthalo green and quinacridone gold make up sap green. So there isn't phthalo green in the palette. But perylene green and quinacridone gold make beautiful colours as well. Yeah. So the perylene as a mixer is also really, really useful.
And that's pushing that whole range of foliage.
Yes.
Jane, I saw a question too about goethite, if there's some alternatives to goethite.
Okay, so goaphate is a yellow earth. So the other options you can look at is a yellow ochre, which is a beautiful yellow earth colour. The Daniel Smith one is relatively transparent. Some yellow ochres are very opaque, and so they vary quite a bit. Another option is to use a burnt sienna, a raw sienna, which is a little bit more orange, so it will mix differently. Another option is a Montamiata natural sienna, which is another lovely one, but quite similar looking to quinacridone gold. So those are the main things I would consider: yellow ochre or raw sienna. There are others like transparent yellow oxide and a few others as well. But yellow ochre would be the obvious one if you don't want the granulation, or if you want a little bit more tinting strength. But I've just always loved goaphate because of the granulation, and I love granulation in painting.
Oh, me too. Me too.
In somewhere like Bath, where you have this beautiful stone, I used a combination of buff titanium and goaphate, and it works really, really well. The two pigment quin gold is very similar to the original, but no, it's not the same. It's not exactly the same colour. There was a certain magic to the PO49, and that you can't necessarily replicate it. But in terms of mixing and using it, it is very similar. So we just don't have the PO49 anymore.
Yeah. Oh, and then Cobalt Teal. That's
okay. Cobalt Teal is a little bit tricky because we don't have the phthalo green. So normally I'd mix Cobalt Teal with Cerulean Chromium and phthalo green, and then a bit of buff titanium. But you can actually get a bit of a tealy colour by mixing the Perylene green with the Cerulean. So it will give you a bit of a teal kind of colour, and then you need to add buff titanium. But when you get down to 12 colours, you're going to have limitations, and it's a case of choosing which limitations you can work with. So this one is a bit harder to get quite to that teal colour. Add just a touch of yellow, and you'll get there.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a little bit. There are kind of
I went a little overboard.
Yeah. Yes, so there are some colours that you can't exactly mix with this one. I mean, if you go to the 15 colours that we did before, so this one had the 15 colours, and you can mix anything with that. But by the time you get down to 12 and then make another couple of selections by having that convenience sap and the convenience perylene, you're reducing the options as well. But I was going for the ones I use most when I'm out sketching. So it's always a bit of a compromise when you drop the number.
No, and I love it, like what we said in the beginning, that this includes these 6 colors that really have the convenience mixes of the neutrals and that quin gold that can really push those beautiful greens and warm things up, and the sienna and Jane's gray. It's so much fun to paint with.
Oh, sorry, there's another way of making a teal. If you mix goaphate and cerulean with more cerulean and less goaphate, you get a lovely granulating turquoise colour. It's really, really lovely, but just more of the blue, and it makes a lovely one. So there's a lot of options. Yeah.
Jane, when did you start discovering, you know, kind of your ultimate mixing colors that you've played with for so long?
I think I've been working on it for a long time. I mean, I'm always playing with palettes and colors, and when I was testing things out, I think in about 2009, I started to deliberately go through every Daniel Smith color and try and figure them all out, and then start working out, okay, which ones do I really want and which ones work the best and so on. And then I created a couple of alternatives and kept on testing and did light fast tests on everything. And in 2012, I think it was, I actually started on it's been quite a while. I did the book on the ultimate mixing set in about 2012. So it's one of those ones that I've sort of developed over quite a period of time, lots of testing, seeing what happens. And really exploring the neutralizing mixes and testing out. I mean, I've got loads and loads and loads of different sketchbooks where I've tested all these colors and tried slight alternatives with what happens with this red or this red or this red and this yellow and this yellow and this, to try and narrow it down to seeing that I can do everything I want with as few as possible. And I'm very happy with what I've ended up with. I think they work very, very well.
Yeah, there's an elegance to it, I think, in distilling down the colors and learning just the ins and outs of them. As an artist, I find it really satisfying to understand, you know, not just that, hey, this is a yellow, but some of the intricacies of it, of, you know, the properties, whether it's transparent or semi-transparent, and the lifting, and to have a sense of how it will behave. And it gives me, as an artist, a greater satisfaction too in learning that.
Well, it's also where watercolor is so is unique, because we're really exploring not just the color, but also the characteristics and how they all work together. And that liftability, which isn't a word but should be, is really important. So, you know, understanding in this palette there is less that is staining, and so most of these colors are liftable, which means you can put a wash down and then you can lift it up again. You can scrub into it, particularly with a firm brush. Oh, you've got the lovely eradicator.
Yeah, we will have them on our website. We have we're small batch and are waiting for just a few more. So I think next month. And I'm kind of honored, Rosemary's including a little iceberg art of mine on the packaging.
Oh, nice. Yes, I've got some of mine on some of the others. It's nice.
I've noticed.
I've been using the eradicator for years, and it is an absolute, you know, take it everywhere brush. It's beautiful for botanics, all sorts of things. So now that it's available as a travel version, I think that's really terrific.
Yeah, I think
so. So you can lift all of these colours. The Perylene green is a bit more staining than the others, but all the rest you can lift, and that's really helpful to know as well.
Yeah.
The question about cerulean. Cerulean is made with PB35. The cerulean chromium is PB36. So in this palette, it's PB36, which is richer and cooler and stronger. So I much prefer the cerulean chromium to just regular cerulean.
Me too.
It gives you a greater palette range. So you have the ultramarine as the warm and the cerulean chromium as the cool. It works very well. But even this, I mean, the traditional thinking of having a warm and a cool yellow and a warm and a cool red and all those sorts of things, we've broken it with this quite a lot, because the yellow is a mid-yellow, an absolute primary yellow. If you wanted to cool it down, you would add the tiniest bit of sap green to it, and it would turn it into a lemon yellow. But the warm yellow isn't a bright warm yellow, it's a little bit neutralized. And so they've all got a little bit skewed one way or another to make them, you know, more mixable. And the rose acts as a primary red. It will actually mix yellow, oranges and purples. And so it's very, you know, it's not quite doing the normal thing that is sort of traditionally looked at, but I'm always sort of trying to think, well, how else could it be? How else could it work? So it's good fun to play with.
And then the game of having some parameters of saying, you've got 12 here, or you've got 6 here, and what are you going to do with that? And
yes, exactly.
This is the first little demi we've sold, totally full of paint too, and it's just such a satisfying little box of chocolates is how I think about them. To open it up
and
have
it's so
them all
tiny.
in there.
I mean, I don't know if people can appreciate just how small that is, but you know, when you look at it in my hand, I mean, you can it disappears. You can have it in a pocket, you can have it inside your wallet. I mean, it's just the tiniest little thing. And I've always loved compact, you know, small items. So, you know, when I saw this on your website, I just thought, oh no.
Well, the note, I'm going to just give you a sneak peek at something in the works. I don't think, it may be a little while before we have this, but I'm playing with doing a bigger palette that we can have for people who want either more colors or for a little more studio work. So it'll be basically twice as big as a dummy palette. So we'll see when this comes out, but I thought I'd just give you a little sneak peek. And Jane, as soon as I have a few more, you'll be first to have one to play with.
Well, that will also give people the ability to set up, you know, paints on one side and a couple of mixing areas on the other, which I think is brilliant.
And I forgot to show you.
I love the way you're always innovating.
Oh, it's just, well, you know, it's fun. I have a new pan that we're playing with too, with the big one that we'll put together. So like I said, things take a little time, even more so these days than they used to. But well,
that's a 5-year-old, isn't it?
Yep. But it'll be fun to bring together. And actually, I'll show you just one more peek at it. We sized it so, you know, kind of the sketching size of a moleskin or a similar notebook. You know, it'll sandwich really nicely with one of those.
Yes.
So stay tuned, and this either this year or in the springtime, whenever things slowly come along.
Yes, everything's slowed down, that's for sure.
So Jane, when let's say someone picks up a palette and it's their first time and they're figuring out how to explore their colors, and do you know, I feel like I kind of run palettes through paces a little bit, and we did a bit in just showing, you know, the triads and the additional kind of convenience colors, but would you be able to recommend some of, you know, a little kind of run a palette through its paces for someone getting to know their colors, whether just swatching them out or exploring, you know, through those triads?
I think swatching them out is really important, because you then see all the qualities. So what I'd like you to do is to start with just draw a square or a rectangle, just a small one. You know, kind of, yeah, that'll do.
Yeah, I can go a little bigger.
No, it doesn't. No, not as big as that. Go back down to the little one. That'll be nice.
Okay.
And just draw one of those, and then I'll talk you through how I would suggest people swatch things out. So if you're trying to get to know it really well, you would put a black line down it, a nice thick black line, so that you see how opaque or how transparent it is. Now, you may not have a black pen handy, so
here's my Sharpie. Okay, down the middle. Black line.
Just anywhere. Just do a nice black line, and then just wave your hand over it to dry that off. Because then what we can do is actually see how transparent and how opaque it is. So just give that a moment. And then when that's dry, you're going to dampen, not wet, but dampen the top third of that swatch right across the whole top.
Top third, okay.
Top third, right. Now you're going to just touch the brush into the yellow, Hansa Yellow, just touch, tiny bit, and then brush it into that and watch what happens. See how it moves.
Here, I'll zoom in a little for everybody.
You see whether it explodes, you see whether it, you know, just what it does on the water. And then still keeping that tiny amount on the brush, bring it down a little bit so that you've got the very light at the top. So just using the same brush and just softening that wash a little bit down.
Oh, bringing it down. There we go.
Just bring it down a little bit. Okay, now touch the yellow again, so you have a bit more onto your palette, not adding any more water, and then go a little bit stronger. So I'm about, you know, a third of the way up, or 2/3 of the way up.
Are we still in the wet area? Part. Okay, just strengthening it now.
No, you bring it down. So keeping it light at the top and strengthening it as you go down.
Okay.
And then you might need a touch more water.
Yeah.
And then you're going back into your colour and going a little bit stronger with it. So you pick up a bit more colour and then keep on bringing it down. So it's getting darker and darker as you move down.
Oh, I see. I got a little opposite. I'll
you got it, yeah.
Let me lighten it up a little at the top. Here we go. So I'll lighten it at the top.
It's funny trying to talk someone else through it without showing them. It's just quite good. I use my words carefully.
Okay, so I'll increase the intensity at the bottom.
Yeah, so you actually, every time you're putting it in, you're picking up more paint. So it's going to go through a kind of, from being a weak tea kind of mix into a tea mix, into a coffee mix, into a milky mix. And by the time you get down to the bottom, it's kind of creamy.
Yeah. And
that's about as thick as you go. So that bottom bit, you're really trying to see if you can cover that black line without ever going really thick. And so you sort of swatch out each colour, and then when it's dry, you then see how much you can lift. So you use your scrubber or eradicator, and try and lift that out, but not till it's dry. So you explore every color like that, and then you can see whether it granulates, you can see whether it's transparent or opaque. In this case, it's a semi-transparent. You'll see it's just covering the bottom of that line a little bit.
Yep, I can just see the pigment. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas if you if you did the same with Quinacridone Rose, you just can't cover the line no matter how much you put it on. So it's totally transparent. Whereas if you did the same with Indian Red, you'd actually cover that black line at the bottom because it is actually completely opaque. And so, so you actually explore each of the colours and test them out and make a note of their pigment number and make a note about, you know, all those sorts of things so that you're really seeing what each of your colours do. So if you do that with the whole palette and explore it, you start to get to know what it is that you're working with. So really soft at the beginning, see that dusky pink colour at the top.
Yeah.
Indian Red has to be treated with quite a bit of, yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, and then start to build it up. So you've got there the sort of the tea and the wheat tea. Then we go into a kind of a coffee mix. Then we go into a milky mix, and it's starting to cover the line.
Oh, and look how opaque that's getting. I'll hold this up a little closer. Totally.
And then go quite strong, and you can cover it. So actually try and cover that line. So Indian Red is one of the very few totally opaque colours, but I very rarely use it full strength. So, you know, it's one of those ones that you're not likely to very often, but it's interesting that you can. So most of the colours here are semi-transparent or transparent, but this one can actually be fully opaque.
I'll add something else that I like to do. I don't know if I have an example right here with me, but when I get a new palette of colors, I'll often cut a little piece of paper the same size as a palette and just dot them out. And then you can give yourself a little reference guide to keep it with your sketchbook or your palette. You can put some packing tape, or if you have a little laminator, cover it with plastic so it's waterproof, and have a little reference guide. Since so many of the colors, when they're dry, don't necessarily show their vibrance. And so that's just a little side thing that I'll sometimes have in my kits when I can keep track of them.
I tend to always set up palettes in the same kind of way. So I can always recognize it. I mean, if you look at, here's one and here's another, and they are basically, you can see they're basically the same kind of order of colors. And so they're nearly always, I'm just so familiar with them that I don't tend to get stuck, but it certainly can help.
Yeah, and I like in this palette that you did them in columns. So there's the yellows on the first column, reds, blues, and then the greens. That's a real nice shorthand to remember, and as you get to know your way around the palette. That's
right. And I thought that was a bit of a thing of what do I do about the Goaphate, because it's part of the earth one, but it's down at the bottom. So I was thinking, oh, does it go up here or does it? But anyway, it works. You figure it out fairly quickly.
I think it does work. Yeah. Well, anybody have any other questions for me and Jane about this palette and all these wonderful colors? I did see a question back a little ways, Jane, that about your book, if it's available in hard copy.
Yes, it is available through the Blurb bookstore online. And if you're in Australia, I can actually send them out within Australia, but it's not really worth trying to send them anywhere else at the moment. So yes, it is available as a hard and a soft. I have one right here. So that's the hard cover looks like that. So it has a fully bound hard cover. So yes, it's available through the Blurb website, or as I say, from me in Australia.
And then tell us too, what classes are available through your website right now that you have going on.
Yeah, I've had quite an interesting year. So since I wasn't able to travel, the courses that I've been teaching as a PDF email class, I've switched over to fully online. So I created my Mastering Watercolours class is now a very detailed 12-lesson course. Apparently some of my students have spent 6 to 8 hours a day working through it for 3 months. So kept people very busy during the COVID shutdown. So there's a lot of information. Each lesson is really, really detailed. So the idea is it builds up a really solid foundation of watercolour, including colour mixing and triads and all the different techniques with watercolour. So that's called Mastering Watercolours. And then I'm working now on one called travel sketching, which is intended to get people working with a portable kit, whether they actually use it to travel or just go in the back garden or take it with them somewhere else. But it's working with a sketchbook and a relatively small palette of colours, but pens, pencils and all sorts of things. So that's a 9-lesson course, and it's running at the moment. And I'm having a lot of fun with both of them. So they're a great international community. There's a lovely interaction between all the people in the class. And I'm having a lot of fun putting them together, and they're just getting bigger and bigger. There's just so much to share. So the first one is really focused on watercolours and is brilliant for people who are relatively new, because the idea is you don't have to actually be able to draw to be able to do the course. And then in the travel sketching, I actually teach people how to draw from life. We go through lots of subjects, but actually learn how to work from life, and then how to get out, whether you want to do urban sketching or botanical sketching, and or travel or not travel, but just to work in a sketchbook with colour and pens and pencils and so on. So I get to do demonstrations of all my favourite pens and pencils and some colour mixing and different subjects and working really from life is the idea.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I have a couple more planned. I'm sort of planning to do an extension botanical sketching and an extension fine drawing extension. And then another extension will be sort of special effects with watercolours, and there'll be probably only 4 lessons each. So there's quite a bit in the pipeline, and I don't think I'm going to be travelling for a long time, so I'll just keep on going with them.
Oh, I'm so glad you're
on my
putting this
website
together. Yeah.
Yeah. So my website, janeblundellart.com, and there's a tutorials and resources section that has lots of information on my book and on watercolour mixing and on palettes and paints and all sorts of things. And the information on the courses and the registration is there. So if anyone wanted to join it, they're very welcome. I do interact. I don't comment on absolutely everything, but I am always checking in. There's a question in every lesson, question session, so that people can ask questions. And I do check that really regularly, so I'm interacting with people. But they're also interacting with each other, and there's a lovely supportive group working through it. So it's really good.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And I'm just so glad. I feel, I've said this before and just think it every time I'm online, is that community and creativity is just so uplifting. And especially during this period, being able to connect with everyone around the world, including you, Jane. And I just thank you so much for your inspiration. I've learned, whether it's about rosemary brushes or cool tools, every time I talk or hang out with you, I sort of have a new thing. I go, ooh, I have to go play with that. It's a little bit trouble, but it's also kind of one of my favorite things. So I'm just so grateful for your work and generosity in exploring art and sharing with us all. And we have...
Well, it's fun working with you too, because you've come up with some great ideas and making things portable. So it's good fun, Maria.
Yeah, well, everyone, we have a limited quantity of the Ultimate Sketching Palette available. So they're all right now at arttoolkit.com under palettes. If they sell out super fast, we might see if we can put together another edition. I saw a couple questions about tubes. I am considering carrying maybe small tubes of paint. We're slowly expanding, and someday, if any of you come to Port Townsend, we're looking to set up a showroom in our our little tiny shop space we have that is just about a mile from my house, and we enjoy working in. So do let me know if any of you come to town. And we have also on our site travel brushes. We'll have the Eradicator soon. Stay tuned. But we've got a number of others that are super versatile. Right now, we just restocked the R12 Dagger, which is a lot of fun. So you can get that on our website with this real versatile tip. We also have, I believe we still have the R9 Squirrel mop, which is a real wonderful, juicy round to paint with. And for someone starting out too, I enjoy, this is the R10 synthetic, which is a real nice round point that has this springy tip. So another fun brush. So I hope you enjoy those. In terms of how long these little paints last, I'm always surprised by how far the paint can go. And it depends how much you paint and how big you work. But in a small sketchbook, I find, it's hard for me to say. These I'd say if you think about a standard quarter pan of paint, or half pan of paint in those little white plastic, these are about a quarter of that. So depending on how you paint, that standard half pan can last a very long time. You know, I do recommend in painting with them, I don't saturate my palette itself with water. I put a little water on my palette, and, you know, we'll mix the colors here or mix on my page. Or if you find you need a little extra space, we've got the mixing palette too, which is a fun little on-the-go palette with some more room. Or you can customize.
Well, that's the thing. You don't need to spray Daniel Smith watercolors. A lot of people the first thing they do is spray their watercolors. You just don't need to, and it's not a good idea with these palettes anyway. But you don't need to. You saw how you just touch a brush and it picks it up so quickly.
Yeah, a little bit of this paint goes a long way. So. Yeah, thank you everyone so much for joining us. Jane, thank you. It's really nice to see you. Here, I'll pull myself up and say goodbye. I'm always happy to see you, and I hope that I hope someday we get to visit and sketch together in person again too.